参加今天故事会今天是第15期了，好快了哈。那么我呢是主持人菲菲，想大家应该一点都不陌生了。我呢人在新加坡，那么今天的话呢也是感谢我们 Tableau Zen Master 的一个社区的一个支持。那么我们今天又请到了一位Tableau 的 Zen Master，那么他的话呢是在伦敦的Mark Reid，他呢其实是最开始的时候是一位 Tableau很平常的一个银行界的用户，那么他实际就是在使用 Tableau 2年期间呢，就已经变成了一个 Tableau Public 的一个大使。那么第3年的话呢，就变成了我们 Tableau Zen Master，所以真的是用 Tableau 用的是很好的，而且很有建设哈。那么他也从2019年的时候，大家可以看得到，就是这一章。那么在2019年呢，他也开始创建自己的网站。那么那个网站呢叫 DataViz， 开始撰写跟 Tableau 相关的一些 blogs， 那么还有记录一些就是 notes， 来帮助用户呢更多的用户来更好的去了解 Tableau。那么今天呢，实际就是想请到他来去讲解那个 Tableau 的动画对不起。对不起，去讲解的话呢 ，Tableau 的动画，为什么我想请到他来讲解 Tableau 的动画？因为是在2019年的时候，他自己做的一个Viz， 就是他使用 Tableau 这个动画的这个功能的时候做的 Viz 的话呢，就已经被 Tableau TC 已经向全球的人去宣传，就是说他做的这个 Viz。那么那个时候他做的好像就是 Know Yourself， 那么是第2个，当时展出的是第2个 Viz。那么在平常他使用 Tableau 的当他平常的话呢，不仅是喜欢使用 Tableau 喜欢用 Tableau， 然后去来发现更多的一些数据的一些内容。那么他呢还喜欢就是说来去旅行，那么特别是喜欢亚洲的一些文化。你看他拍的这些照片也是很漂亮的。那么我想在这个里面特殊的就是说想介绍一张照片这张照片的话呢是感觉像大草原，这个其实是让我感觉很想家，因为我呢就是来自于内蒙古大草原的一个草原的孩子。那现在的我今天就不多介绍 Mark 还有他的照片了，那么还是就是说请 Mark 呢来去开始他今天对我们故事会所有听众的一个分享。那么这个的话呢是主要是帮助整个中国的用户，然后还有就是说来去准备的一个 session， 所以呢希望大家能够东西，然后呢来喜欢他的分享。那好 ，Mark over to you。
Great, thanks Feifei. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Fantastic. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so we should have a presentation up now. Okay, fantastic. All right, so thanks again, Feifei, for the invite. It's great to be with you speaking today. And quite excited to be talking about this new feature that came into the product last year, the animated transitions or Viz animations. So it's been in the product for about a year now, and some of you may have seen this already, but it'd be great to kind of talk through some of the possibilities and what you can do with Viz animations. So we're going to split this presentation into kind of 2 halves. So the first half will be with these slides, and we'll be focusing more on the why animation is useful and how it can work for you. And in the second half, we'll be looking at more the technical side and the how you make particularly custom animations and some of the calculations that you might need. So that's where we'll kind of progress. So I'm actually going to start off by showing a few slides, and these have no animations, and we're just going to walk through a series of slides on the same data, just with different views, and I'll be switching between them. And it may be some challenges to try and follow along to that, and we'll talk about those challenges after we've looked at those, and then see how hopefully animations can help to reduce some of those challenges. So just try and follow along as best you can over the next 4 or 5 slides, and as we look at this data. Okay, so starting off with this view here of the average monthly sales over 10 years. And you can see on the left-hand side there that the average sales for 2009 was 340 million. And the average monthly sales in 2018 was about 1.3 billion. Okay, in this next view, we're looking at the actual monthly sales. And you can see if I put a label at the start and the end of each of those years, you can see the seasonality there. And we have an increase in the sales towards the end of the year. We're now looking at a view that allows us to compare the months more easily. So you can compare all of the Januaries and all of the Februaries year on year. And you can see in the last 3 years, there was a bit of a jump in the sales there in November, December time. Okay, now looking at a combined monthly view. So this is all of the months over the 10 years. And you can see that the total sales for December over 10 years was about 11 billion. And then finally, we're looking at sales split by category this time. So you can see that the total December sales for non-store retailing over the 10 years was about 5.5 billion. Okay, so how easy was it to understand the changes between these graphs? I'm guessing there would have been some challenges, and we can talk about some of the challenges that you may have faced now. So one of the first ones is we were changing the granularity of time. So we were moving from a yearly view of the data to a monthly view. And we're also changing from a continuous view of the dates to a discrete view of the dates, by which I mean the dates were initially going sequentially from left to right. So we had 2008 on the left and 2018 on the right hand side. And then we moved into this parallel view of the dates where they're all stacked on top of each other. So that can be quite tricky to follow along to, especially if you're new to this data, haven't seen it before. Okay, and the last one we were looking at, we changed the granularity of the dimensions. So we were looking at sales at the yearly level, and then we're looking at total aggregated sales, and then we switched to looking at sales by category. So how can we help to reduce some of these challenges when we're presenting data? Well, one of the things we can use is something called object constancy. And this is described by Mike Bostock, who's the creator of the D3 programming language, as when a graphical element that represents a particular data point can be tracked visually through the transition. And this lessens the cognitive burden by using pre-attentive processing of motion rather than sequential scanning of labels. So I mentioned pre-attentive attributes there, and you may have seen a slide similar to this before. And these pre-attentive attributes include things such as color, and you can see in the bottom left, or the length of bars, or the size of circles in bubble plots, for example. And there's a couple of these pre-attentive attributes in the lower right, which actually focus on animation and motion. So here we can see we're talking about direction and velocity. And it's this new feature of animation that allows us to make use of these pre-attentive attributes to help us more easily understand what's happening when we change the view. So just a quick overview of some of the settings you can have of the animations in Tableau. So we have a new side panel similar to the way we have a formatting panel or a data pane at the moment. There's a new panel on the left-hand side. And we can switch the animation on or off. And we can change the duration of the animation. There's some presets of fast, medium, and slow. And there's a custom setting as well. And we can also change the style of the animation. So there's simultaneous or there's sequential. And you can change all of these settings either at the workbook level or at the individual worksheet level. So let's go back and have a look at those slides that we looked at before, this time with the transitions switched on, and see if you find it a little bit easier to follow along. I'm just going to move this over to the side here. Okay, so we're starting off with the average monthly sales view again. And now I'm going to transition into the monthly view. So you're going to see this line break up, change the granularity, and you'll see the monthly granularity come through there. Again, we can see the seasonality when we separate out the lines. You see the start and the end months. And we're going to transition now into a parallel view. So to be more easily see a view to more easily compare the individual months. So I'm going to move all of the Januaries over to the left-hand side and all of the December months over to the right-hand side, and you'll be able to track each of those years as they move. So we'll do that now. Okay, and we can now more easily compare those months. Okay, the next thing we want to do is actually aggregate these years together. So we can see all the months separately are lined up. I want to aggregate all of those data points together. So all the Decembers will come together, all the Novembers will come together, and so on. And we'll do that now. So we now have a thicker line. As we see, it includes all of the sales, and we can see that the total sales for that December month over 10 years was about 11 billion. And now I want to split this aggregated line out. So we're going to split the line out, and all the categories are kind of come out from there. And we'll do that now. And then you can see that the non-store retailing for December total sales was about 5.5 billion, and the remainder of the sales were for the other categories on the screen there. So hopefully that was easier to follow along, and hopefully those animations were kind of smooth and worked over the WebEx here. But that's the idea, is that we just have this other quote from Mike Bostock here, that animated transitions are pretty, but they also serve a purpose. They make it easier to follow the data, and hopefully that's what you're able to do in that last set of sequence of animations there. You can actually follow the data as it moves around the screen. You're not having to read those labels before the state changes and afterwards, and trying to track it manually in your own mind. You can actually follow the data as it moves across the screen. So I'll just call out a couple of presentations, and I have links to these in the workbook, which we'll share later. And these were given at the Tableau conference in 2019 by a number of the product managers that have been working on the feature, and they go into a bit more detail of how it's developed and a few more use cases. So definitely worth taking a look at those. So we'll have a look at some examples now of where animations can be useful. So we're going to start off by looking at sorting data and seeing it move across the screen. So again, there's going to be this style here. I'll sort of demonstrate something without the animations, and then we'll turn them on to see the difference. So what I'm just going to ask you to do here is pick one of the subcategories on the left-hand side, one of the copiers or bookcases and so on. And I'm going to change the sort order here. So you can see in the top left, we're currently sorting by sales. I'm going to change that to profit and then discount. So what you need to do is just pick one of those subcategories. I'll change the sort order and then try and find the subcategory that you picked. So I'll change the sort order now. Okay, and just try and find the subcategory that you were picked initially. And then I'll change the sort order again to discount. Okay, and try and track it down again. And then we'll switch back to sales again. So I think you may have found that quite challenging, and the reason being is that these subcategory names there in the bars, they just disappear and then they reappear in their new locations. So you can't really track something there because it's disappearing and reappearing. So the only way to find the subcategory that you were looking for is to kind of start at the top of that list and work your way down, which takes a bit of time. So we're going to switch the animations on now and do this again, and you'll see the things move across the screen and be able to track them more easily. So just pick one of these subcategories again, either copiers or bookcases and so on, and I'll change the sort order now. Okay, so hopefully you found that easier to follow along, and I'll just change the sort order again to discount now. Okay, and I'm sure you will have found that much easier to follow a particular item on the screen. So the way that the transitions work in Tableau, they've split it into 4 stages. So we'll talk through those now. So there's the first one is exiting. So that's when you change the state and data is being filtered out, or when there's no data. And the next one is moving, and this one is a little bit ambiguous. And when we talk about moving, it's actually the resizing of bars, for example. So if we have a filter and we go from 1 year to the next, and if the bar value is 500 in the first year and 1,000 in the second year, that bar has to increase in size, and that's the movement that we're talking about there. The sorting is what we've just looked at. So that's where, for example, bars might be rearranging based on the new values. And then entering is when new data is entering into the view, being filtered in, for example. And there's different styles, as I say. So you can have this simultaneous, and that's where those 4 steps that we just showed happen at the same time. Or you can have sequential, and that's where the 4 steps are happening one after the other in clearly delineated steps. So let's look at those 2 different styles of animation now. So what I'm going to do in the top right there, you see I have a filter, and I'm going to filter out the consumer category. And what you're going to see is those 4 steps will happen. So there's going to be 2 of the subcategories on the left there are going to exit the view, and then the bars are going to move, as in resize, and then there'll be a change in the sort. So that's going to happen now. You'll be able to watch that. So that's all happening at the same time. It's quite difficult to see that actually 2 of the subcategories exited the view there. because everything is happening at the same time. But see if you can spot which of those two subcategories are as I filter them back into the view. Now I'm going to bring consumer back into the view. Okay, again, it's still quite tricky to see. It was actually the tables and chairs. But we're going to do this again now, this time with the sequential transitions, and you'll see, hopefully it's a lot easier to track that happening. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing again. You're going to filter out the consumer, and you're going to see those 4 steps happening. So you can see the exiting, then the moving, and then the sorting. So let's do that now. So you can see the 2 values exit, then there's the movement, and then the sorting. So it's the same things that happened before, but they're happening in separate stages, so it's more easy to see what's happening there. So I'm going to go ahead and filter consumer back in, and you're going to see those 2 values will enter the view. You're going to see firstly the movement, then the sorting, and then finally the entering. That's the 2 values coming back into the view there. So let's do that now. So there's the movement and the sorting, and then the entering into the view of those 2 subcategories. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference between those different styles of animations and which one will be better for your use case. And these animations work across, obviously, dashboards. So if you have multiple worksheets, the animations will work across all of those. So we're going to just show this again without any animations. So I'm just going to filter out the furniture category here. And you'll see that everything just moves to fill that space instantly. And if we filter it back in, the reverse happens. So all happens instantly. There's no movement there at all. So we switch on transitions now and do that again. So you can see with the simultaneous transitions, it's smooth. Everything happens at the same time. And as we filter it back in, the other categories move out of the way and furniture filters back in. And just to show you with the sequential, so very similar, but this time there's just more clearly delineated steps. So furniture disappears completely, and then the other categories move into the space. And likewise in reverse, the categories move out of the way fully. You have this white space, and then furniture filters in there. So it's just more clear what's happening there. Okay, we're going to go and look at some examples with scatter plots in a moment, but just first of all, I'll just show you some examples from the Tableau community who've been doing lots of work with animations, particularly when this product, the feature first was released. So this first one is from Luke Stanke. He's a Tableau Zen Master, and he was just sharing this example here where you can scroll across a view in the top half of the pane, and based on a selection in the lower half of the view there, which kind of, so it has a split view, kind of a zoomed out view and a zoomed in view. And Luke's written a blog on that, which is at the bottom of the screen there. So we can send you all of these links afterwards to find out. You can get to those and see how that was made. And this next one is from Neil Richards. So he is animating chess moves in a game here. And this is quite an interesting example. I think this would be good for various different sports. Maybe you could have an animation of the moves throughout a game and various metrics around that on a dashboard, for example. This one is from Alex Varlamov, and you can see it's animating through different chart types here. So Alex has been doing loads of work with animation actually and various other features, and you can look at some of those on his Tableau public profile. Again, the link is below the animation there. And then finally this one from Ludovic, and he's animating these charts on the right hand side. You can see it's quite a subtle animation, but I think it's really nice, really kind of brings this visualization to life based on the selections that you make on the left there. You can see the charts moving between those. So there's just a few examples, there's many more, and you can search for this hashtag, the Viz animations, and you can either do that on Twitter or also on Tableau Public, and you'll find various other examples as well, many of which you can download and reverse engineer. Okay, so we're going to look at some examples with scatter plots now, and this is, I think, a really good use case for animations, because when you change the state here, such as through filtering or changing a parameter, for example, things are moving in 2D space, so it'd be quite difficult to follow along if there's no animations in place, and we'll see that now actually. So I'm just going to ask you to pick one of these letters, one of these circles on the screen here, and just try and follow the circle that you pick based as we move through the next 3 years of data. So I'm going to click play on the card on the top right, and you're going to see that these circles will move, and just try and follow along without any animations first of all. So we'll do that now. Okay, and I think that probably would have been quite difficult. So what we're going to do now is add in one of the pre-attentive attributes that I mentioned earlier, and that is the color. So we're going to repeat this again. So pick one of the circles and try and follow along, and hopefully it'll be a bit easier. Okay, so hopefully that was a little bit easier. Still not super easy, but we're going to add in the animations now, the transitions, and see how easy you find it this time. Hopefully it will be a lot easier. So again, just pick one of those circles, and we're going to start the animation now. Okay, so hopefully you found that much easier to follow along to with those transitions. You can really see the effect that they have. And this is particularly useful, for example, if you're presenting data, I mean, as much as I am now, but if you imagine you're presenting your data to an audience that hasn't seen it before, is not familiar with the charts, maybe not even familiar with the chart types, these transitions can really make it much easier for people to follow along to what's happening as you transition between different views of the same data and help to tell that story. And it's so powerful, in fact, that we can even remove those other pre-attentive attributes. So we can remove the labels, we can remove the color, and I think you'll find it's still quite easy to follow along. So we'll just demonstrate that now, this final animation here. So just pick one of those circles again, and we'll just go through this one more time. I'll click play now. Okay, so again, I hope you still find that easy to follow along. So you can really see the effect of having these transitions in place. It's quite a major benefit. And so this is not new, of course. You may be familiar with the work of Hans Rosling, and he gave a quite a famous TED talk some years ago. I think it was 2006, and he was talking about the development of countries throughout the world based on various metrics through the use of these animated scatter plots, which you can see in the background there. It was a really powerful talk in many respects due to the way that Hans Rosling presents himself as a very good communicator. But also the actual charts themselves were really helped in telling the story. So when this feature came into Tableau, I was quite keen to try and replicate some of these charts. So I was going to finish off this first half of the presentation with, as I say, one of these workbooks where I try to replicate these, and I'll just talk through what's happening as this plays through. So you can see on the screen we have some large circles. These represent regions of the world, and you can click through into these and break those out into a lower level of detail to see the individual countries there. We can break them all out, and then we can actually show the names and hit play there, and you'll see the countries move up towards the top left as we move through the years, as the births per woman decreases and the life expectancy increases on average overall. And as you hover there, you can see the individual values for each country, or if we aggregate them up to the region level, you can see the individual metrics at the region level as well. So we're going to go back to the first year again now. I'm actually going to change the metrics on the axes. So we're going to change the x-axis to GDP per capita and the y-axis to child survival. And then we're going to hit play again, and this time we'll see that the countries move up to the upper right corner as the GDP per capita increases and the child survival also increases over time. So we can hover over there, and as we hover you can see the individual countries and how they spread out across the range of values across those axes. And that was, I think, one of the points that Hans Rosling was really trying to stress, is that sometimes we can think of these regions as being quite homogeneous, whereas in fact they are really is quite a lot of diversity there in the individual countries within them. You can see them sitting at different values across those axes. Okay, and this is this workbook is actually on my Tableau Public. If you want to take a look at that, you can also download that and reverse engineer and see how that was built. Okay, so that's the end of this first half of the presentation. We're going to switch into Tableau Desktop now and actually focus a bit more on how you make these. So let me just go over to Tableau now. So we're going to just switch this into presentation mode, and just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, so in the second half of the presentation, we're going to go through various things. So we're going to look at a few of the fundamentals which are quite important to know. for animation. So we're going to look at what is a mark in Tableau. We're then going to look at what is the view level of detail, the view LOD, and then what is a mark ID. So mark ID is quite an important concept for animation, and how that changes really affects the animation that you see. So we'll go into some detail on that. We're then going to look at some default animations using pages and filtering, and then we'll go on to look at a few custom animations and how you create those using calculations and so on. And then finally, I'll leave you with a few resources, some blogs, and some examples from the community. Okay. So what is a mark? So a mark in Tableau is how the data is encoded in the view. So you can have, for example, a text mark we have at the top here. You could have some bar marks here. Here we've got circle marks. We've got nine circle marks here, and there's various other options as well. So density plots or Gantt bars, pie charts, and so on. I'm sure many of you are familiar with all of these. So one thing just to call out is that the number of marks that you see in the view is not dependent on the size or the volume of your data. So for example, this single text mark here could be based on a data set that has 1 billion rows of data, whereas these 3 bar marks here could be based on a very small data set with just 3 rows, for example. Okay, so we talk about the view level of detail now. So the view, the number of marks that you see in the view is based on the view level of detail. And the view LOD is determined by the dimensions that you have in the view, and in particular where you place them in the view. So essentially it's anywhere. You can see I've got a kind of screenshot of the desktop here. So if you place a dimension to any of these highlighted areas, you're going to change the view LOD. So it's really anywhere except for the filters or the tooltips.
I'm sorry, Mark. Are you able to adjust the font? It's a bit too small.
So I don't think I'm going to be doing that easily, actually. I will talk through everything that you see on the screen, and I will just say that the workbook itself is also downloadable. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to change the font easily across all of the pages. But
yeah, I understand.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, is it viewable enough as we follow along? I think when we look onto some of the animations later, it'll be a bit clearer, hopefully.
I think it's still viewable.
Okay.
Yeah, let me just explain. 这个的话呢是看着有点字体有点小，但是以后的话我们会把那个 Mark 的这个 presentation 或者说这个 workbook 的话发给大家。Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Feifei. So yeah, so in this top one here, we've got the view LOD is at the category level of category, and you see because there's 3 unique values of category in the data, we're seeing 3 marks. In this bottom view here, the view LOD is category and segment, and there's 3 unique values for category, 3 unique values for segment. So that's resulting in 3 categories times 3 segments, and that's giving us 9 marks there. So in this next slide here, we're looking at what is a mark ID. So a mark ID is a unique reference for a single mark in the view. And this is determined by the dimensions in the view as well, but it's actually talking about the individual unique values, not the actual dimension itself. So the view LOD for this view here is based on the category and ship mode. So that's the view LOD. But the mark ID is the individual values of those dimensions. So here the mark ID for this mark here is technology in second class. And for this one, it's office supplies and standard class, for example. And you'll see as I change the filter here, you're going to see some of these marks will exit the view. There'll be one that will enter the view. And these 2 here will move. And I'll explain a bit more about what's happening there in a second. So you can see them moving. And if I switch back, you'll see them move back. And these 2 marks enter the view. So what's happening there? Let me just show you in a table. Hopefully you can see this. So in the 2008 data, we have mark IDs that you see on the left here. And in the 2019 data, we have these mark IDs here. So you can see where it exists in the first, but not in the second. You're getting this exiting. And if it does not exist in 18, but it does exist in 19, you're getting this entering. And if it exists in both sides, then you get this movement. So these are all types of animation here. And that's the type of animation that you see will be dependent on the mark IDs. And that's basically based, what your data holds and does the data exist in both states. So in this case, it's 2018 and 2019. And if it does, then you get this movement. If it doesn't, then you get the exiting and entering, this fading in and out. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through some simple animation here using the pages shelf. So I'm just animating this very simple data set in the top here. These are the dimensions and these are measures, which is plotting this mark on the view. So I've got pages on the year shelf and I've got these other two dimensions on the label shelf here. So as I play through, you're going to see, because there's no change in the mark ID here, the mark ID is made up of just these two dimensions. You see it's just smoothly moving across there because there's no change. So just to note, I mentioned previously that the mark ID is made up of the dimensions in the view. So you'll see that this dimension year is in the view here on pages shelf, but it's not changing the mark ID, so hence we're not getting this exiting and entering. And the reason it doesn't change the mark ID is because the way it works is anything that's on the pages shelf is excluded from the mark ID. So that's quite important, because if it was included in the mark ID, then you would see this fading in and out, and that's not what we want when we're using the pages shelf. So that's just something to be aware of. It's only the dimensions that are included in this area that are included in the mark ID. So this next example, I've removed the item from the label shelf here. So now we're only looking at region, and you can see that I've changed one value here. So this is going to change as we animate through these pages. So we'll do that now, and you're going to see we have this smooth movement here, and then you're going to see the mark exits the view as the value changes, and it's going to re-enter the view, and then you're going to see the smooth movement now as we have the same value. So that's what you would expect to see there as the mark ID is changing. So in this next one, you can see I brought region onto the shelf here. So now we have these two dimensions. So now we're going to be looking at both of these that all make up the mark ID. But this is a bit of an edge case here. It's just something to be aware of. If we are using the pages shelf and we have multiple dimensions in the view as well, it may not use all of those dimensions for the mark ID. So you might expect this to still exit the view here, but in fact it's going to continuously transition across all the way across there. So that's just something to be aware of. If you are using the pages shelf and multiple other dimensions, they may not all be included in the mark ID. Now there is a way to force them to be included, and that's to add them to this detail shelf here. And if you do that, then they will definitely be included in the mark ID. So we'll play this again, and you'll see this time we have the smooth animation here. Then we get this exiting the view as the dimension value changes. Then it fades back into view, and then you get this smooth transition here at the end. So hopefully that makes sense. Just really the takeaway is, if you are using the pages shelf and you have multiple dimensions in the view, and if you're not seeing the animation you expect, then just try adding the dimension to the detail shelf there. Okay, this next one is now looking at the same data set, this time with filters. And the thing I just want to point out here is that there's no longer a need to put the dimension onto the detail shelf. If we're using the filters, we're not using the pages shelf, everything will be included in the mark ID. So you can see as I change the filter here, the mark moves across, and then it does exit the view as expected, and the new mark will fade in and then back out again, and then transition. So just to point out, there's no need to use put the dimension on the detail shelf in this case with the filters. Okay, so that was all a bit sort of technical, a lot to take in there. Really want to stress that when you are using these animations, 90% plus of the time, you don't need to worry about any of that, and you don't need to worry about creating specific calculations or changing any settings. You simply just switch on the animations. And when you do that, you see I've got a very simple dashboard here with a few charts. You can see that all the animations will just work. There's nothing extra that you need to do at all. Okay. And I'll just show you really quickly how you switch those on. So if you imagine this is your dashboard and you want to animate that, you simply go up to the Format menu here, go to Animations, and you click that, and it'll open the side panel, which we looked at earlier, and then you can just switch the animations on or off. And that's as simple as it is there. Okay, so we'll just go back to the presentation view. So that's the default animations, but you may want to do something more custom. And we'll look at a few of the examples that I shared in the first half of the presentation and how you can create those. So this is the view we were looking at with the average monthly sales over 10 years and changing from a yearly view to a monthly view. And I'll just show you how that's made. So this is done by putting a calculation here, a date trunk calculation on the column shelf. And I'm just switching out there the level of that date trunk using either a year or a month. And that's with a parameter there. And just to know that these values on the left, they're all lowercase, so it's a lowercase y, but I'm displaying it with an uppercase. And that's just because the value that you pass into this calculation doesn't all need to be lowercase. So then we're displaying it with the uppercase there, you can see, but as we switch that over, the value goes into the calculation, and that changes the granularity of the view there. Okay, this next one is a bit more difficult, so we're looking at changing the way the dates are laid out, whether it's sequential or in parallel. But you can see here this isn't quite working, and I'll explain why it's not. You can see the 2009 is animating as we expect, but the other ones are exiting the view and then re-entering the view. And the reason that's happening is because I'm using a calculation again here, and I'm just swapping out the date that's used on the columns shelf. So I'm either using the sales date itself, or I'm shifting the dates back to start at 2009. And because I'm changing that dimension value that's in the view, it's changing the mark ID. So as we talked through earlier, when you change the mark ID, you are going to get this exiting entering, which is not what we want. So to get around that, what we need to do is use a measure on the column shelf here instead. So this time I'm using a measure, which is the number of months from the start of the year. And this time when we change this value here, you can see we're getting that smooth animation across backwards and forwards, and that's the animation that I was looking for in this case. So just talk through how that works. So this time, as I say, I'm using a measure calculation here. So it's calculating the difference in the months between the very first year in the data set and the sales date. So for example, January of 2009 will return 0, February of 2009 will return the number 2, and so on. But in the second half, if we have the dates in parallel, it's returning the difference of January at the first of each year and the month of the sales date. So January 2010 would return 0, February 2010 will return 1, and so on. And then just add 1 at the end so that it makes a bit more sense. So January becomes 1, February becomes 2, and so on. So you can see, for example, if we switch these into parallel now, all of these months here line up to 1. So all the Januaries become 1, all the Februaries will become 2, and so on. And if I switch them sequentially, we have the months as they are sequentially. So this would be 1 for January the 1st, 2019. This would become 13, this would be 25, and so on. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And then the next one we're looking at was aggregating, changing the view there. So we're splitting it by a year here, and then we bring those together to be aggregated, and then we're splitting it by category. So again, I'm just showing you, demonstrating how this is kind of not the way to do it. So you can see the marks are entering and exiting the view. And the reason it's doing that again is because we have this calculation here where I'm swapping out the dimension. So you can see I am, based on the parameter value, just bringing the year into the view, or I'm bringing category into the view, or I'm bringing nothing in to aggregate it totally. So again, same problem, changing the dimension in the view there, that's changing the mark ID, and therefore that's changing, not allowing the smooth animation that we want to see. So to fix that, we do a very similar thing. We have to use a calculation here, so we bring both of the dimensions into the view. We've got year and category in, and then have a calculation that actually changes the sales value, which is what's used in the view there. So you can see if I want to see the sales by year, I exclude the category and return the sum of sales. If I want to view the sales by category, then I exclude the date and just return the sum of sales. And if I want to see a fully aggregated view, then I exclude both the category and the date and return the sales. Okay, so this time when we change that setting, you can see we get this smooth animation now, aggregated and then split out by category. And so the dimension are in the view, but the calculation that's used to draw the view is not changing at all, not changing the dimension values, so the mark IDs stay the same. Okay, so one thing to point out here is the way this works is that there are actually multiple lines being drawn on top of each other. So for example, if I highlight this point here, see I've actually got 6 items selected. We can even go and view these. I know this will be very small, but just to highlight, these are all the same kind of months here, but you're seeing the different categories being drawn on top of each other, all with the same value. So that's kind of how that works. You are drawing multiple views on top of each other. Similarly, in this view here with the scatter plots, we changed the kind of perceived level of the view here. You can see that they're being drawn at either the country level or the state level. So when we switch to state level, you see multiple circles, and when we get to country level, all of the circles move and sit on top of each other and return the same value for the country. So similar kind of thing here. It's a little bit simpler. If it's at the state level, we just return the sum of sales, and if it's at the country level, we exclude the state and return the sum of sales for all of the marks in the view. So likewise, if I select these, you can see I'm selecting 12, and those 12 marks represent the 12 states that make up that country. So it's all for the country France, but you've got the different state values there. Okay, so hopefully that'll make sense. And then this one is looking at changing, being able to actually animate the headers. So the default view in the default animation in Tableau is that you can't animate the headers. So you'll see as I change the filter here, these bars are animating, but the headers just jump to their new location. So what we can do is create a different view to actually put the headers here separately, and then I try and animate those. I'll just demonstrate that to you now. So this time we have 2 views, one on the left, one on the right, and you'll see that now they are animating. And I'll just talk briefly through how that's done. I'll just actually exit this presentation mode and just show you what I've done there. So now you can see I've got one view here and one view here, and if we go into this view, you can see I just have a dummy measure at the top here, min1, and if we show the header there, you see that just goes from 0 to 1, so all of the marks are down the left there. And the important thing to point out is that obviously the level of detail needs to be the same. We've got a subcategory here, but also the filters, any filters that you apply must apply to both this view and the view that has the bars in, and the sorting, if you have the sorting on there, that also needs to be the same on both views. So I'll just go into this view for a second, and I'll just show these headers here as well. So you can see when I go back to the view now, these are the default headers for this view, and this is the separate view that has the headers that we're going to animate. And I'll just hide this header here, and you can see they all line up now. And if I change the filter, you see these are moving and they line up as we expect. That's what we want to see. So now I can see everything's in place. I can actually go ahead, just hide that header, and everything lines up there, and now this animation is now working. So it's a little bit sort of a hack there to get that working, but if you do have a need to animate those headers, you can do that there using that technique. Okay, so that's all of the kind of content that I wanted to walk through. I'll just leave you with various links here and this resources page. I know this will be quite small for you, but when you download this, you'll be able to reach these and be able to click on these links. So there's a number of blogs by various folks in the community there, some Tableau public examples, some of them that we looked at earlier. And there's one here as well from Klaus, which is looking at mobile animations, quite nice as an example of that. The 2 conference videos I called out in the first half of the presentation, we've got links to those here as well, and some relevant help pages from the Tableau help site, which would be useful. And I've just copied in that Viz Animations hashtag again, so if you want to search on Twitter or Tableau Public for those, you can do that. And I'll just say a mention to thanks to Paul Isaacs for he used to work at Tableau. He left recently actually, but he was very helpful. He worked on this product feature and was kindly gave a lot of his time to help in putting this, answering a lot of my questions when I was putting this materials together. So thanks, Paul, for that. So that's really all I wanted to talk through, Fei Fei. So I'll hand back to you there. Happy to take any questions on the material that we talked through. So thanks again.
Thank you, Mark. 那我们现在的话就开始 open Q&A 吧，看看大家有没有什么问题。然后再就是说 Q&A 的时候的话呢，我想那个先做一个投票，然后让大家来对今天的一个演讲内容的一些投票、一些建议，还有就是你们以后希望那个去听到的一些内容。所以大家可以就是说用不到1分钟的时间，然后呢就是你们再想一下自己有什么问题，然后可以问一下 Mark。看看大家有什么问题吗？看看大家有问题吗？哦，让我来看一下哦。Okay. Hey, Mark, are you able to see the question? 哦，请问大家有问题吗？看一下。OK，Q&A 有一个。Hey, Mark. A mark ID is a unique reference for the single mark. It's a very interesting combination. 所以这个是一个问题吗？还是就是说一个 comment？ 应该是一个 comment 对吗 ？Mark, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry, it was a question about mark IDs, I think. So I was just, yeah, I'm trying to, I don't think I can see the questions actually.
It's under Q&A.
Q&A.
Yep.
How do I get to the Q&A more?
Yep.
Oh, Q&A. Oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. Gosh, I've got so many things here. All right, so mark ID is a unique reference mark. Okay, yeah, so that's right. Yeah, so so the mark ID basically defines a unique point on the screen. So yeah, it will determine how how animation takes place. So whether something will fade in or out, i.e. exit the view or enter the view, or whether it will actually have a smooth animation. So it's really important concepts. It's a bit tricky to get your head around that, but yeah, I'll just point out I do have this blog post as well, which does go through that in a bit more detail. So you can read a bit more about that. I think some of the questions I'll probably refer back to this blog post, which I wrote about a year ago, so I may have to refresh my own memory. But yeah, I think it'd be useful to talk through some of that as well.
All right, okay. So there's another question. What is the difference between page and animation?
Yeah, so pages in Tableau just allow you to animate through multiple stages at the same time. So if you put, for example, a year on the page itself, you can click play and then it will move through each of those years. So this existed before animation. It's just that it would have, it would have kind of jumped between each value in the pages shelf. You could show trails on there as well, so you could see a path of the previous values on the screen. So it kind of gives you a sense of where things have moved from and to. But it wouldn't have been animated, whereas now we have, with animation, you can actually see things move smoothly as it goes across the different values on the pages shelf. So yeah, that's kind of how the pages shelves work.
Thanks. 然后那个下一个问题的话呢，就是 which version animations are available on？应该是2020.2 is 2020.2, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yeah, 2020.1, I think if I remember correctly, is when they came into the product. Yeah, at the start of last year, first release of last year.
Yep. 所以还有大家其他的问题吗？我们可以就是有问题的话就问吧。他做 animation 的话，在全球做的是应该是非常好的一个 Zen Master。没有问题了吗？I don't think any questions are coming up.
Okay. Someone's
Yeah.
just asking about the blog
Oh,
link, so I'll just put that in
okay.
there. Hopefully I can just paste this in here.
Yep. So I think maybe you can post the blog link and also the Tableau public animation core concept.
Okay. I think you may
So
have
those
to
two.
you might have to just post that in, or maybe I can put it in the chat here. Let me try this. It's not letting
Okay.
me post there. Let's try that. Okay, hopefully that's worked.
嗯哼，
Yeah.
所以
I
嗯哼
was trying to think if I have the link in here. I'll just put this link in here.
Yeah. So there's another question. So would animation would be consume a lot of CPU memory or giving that a big data set? I don't think so, right?
Yeah, obviously it will depend on the size. I think the main factor is the number of marks in the view. So the number of, marks that you're showing in the view. If you're trying to show many thousands, then the animations can either sort of slow, or sometimes they just won't animate. It gets to a point where it won't animate. It's also determine the complexity of the view will determine whether it animates locally. So yeah, that'll be the main factors. Obviously, processing of your, the kind of hardware that you're working with will have a factor as well. It's I think that there's no real documentation around all of the individual factors that determine, the kind of the maximum amount of marks or particular situations where it will and won't. But there is I'll just link to that help page actually. I talk about that. Here we go. Help pages. Yeah. So. Let's see if we can bring this up here. Okay, so yeah, in some of the help pages, it does talk about some things, yeah, sometimes where they won't play. So you see, so animations won't play if the viz is server rendered. So for example, if you're using polygons have to be rendered on the server. So if you're using those, you won't get animation, for example. There's some unsupported features at the moment. So maps and density marks. So you've got pies, polygons, text marks won't animate. Axes and headers, which we were talking about there, and there's a workaround to get the headers to animate. Forecasts and trends. So these are things that are kind of unsupported in terms of animation. So that's good to be aware of. So I'll just put that in there. I think, well, it's in the blog. I've got the link to the blog there, so you can get to that as well. Just copy that in there.
看看大家其他人还有问题吗？ Oh, there's another question. It should be under Q&A.
Sequential to parallel and the view and the fulfilled at both are good ideas. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's it's a good idea to be able to switch those between those. Yeah, it's an interesting. I think it really helps in terms of just being able to track the data as it moves across the screen. It kind of goes back to that quote from Mike Bostock where he's talking about being able to follow the marks as they move across the screen, as opposed to having to read labels before and after, and then be able to kind of think it through in your own mind of where things moved from and to. So yeah, it does require a few more calculations to get those kind of things to work. But if you're presenting data that does require that kind of movement, it can really help your audience to be able to follow along, I think. So just lowering that cognitive load on your audience. So yeah, thanks for that.
看看还有其他的吗？没有了哈。Oh yeah, I don't think there's further question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the invite again, Feifei. Really happy to talk to you and the folks there on the call. Thanks for joining, and yeah, feel free to reach out via various the social channels there, whatever you have access to, Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Happy to connect.
You are very, very welcome, and we're happy to have you and share with us about the animation functions with all the Chinese-speaking Tableau users.
Great, brilliant. Yeah, really appreciate it, and hopefully it's useful. I know it's a lot of kind of information to get through, but hopefully with the workbook and the blogs and what have you, it will make people can go through in their own time, and it will make more sense. So, yeah, again, thanks very much. Happy to join today. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you again, hopefully.
Yeah, happy to return and in the future, no problem.
Yeah, and 那所以这样的话，大家就感谢大家时间，然后周末愉快。Thank you, Mark. Have a nice weekend.
Great, thank you.
Thanks,
Feifei.
Have a great week, rest of day. Thank you.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
And cheers. Bye. Bye.